Does the Horn of Winter hold the key to the endgame of A Song of Ice and Fire? Where is it? What does it do? And how is it connected to the Stark Dead and the Crypts of Winterfell? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. On this channel we dive deep into A Song of Ice and Fire, as well as The Lord of the Rings, The Witcher, and much more. Welcome. This is the next in a series of videos focused on the Starks, Winterfell, and the Long Night. You don't need to have watched the previous videos to enjoy this one, but they will help provide some context, particularly when we turn to the Winterfell crypts. There's a link in the description. One of the biggest mysteries in A Song of Ice and Fire is the Horn of Winter. It sounds immensely powerful, and the search for it has impacted on tens of thousands of people, but none of the characters in the story know exactly where it is, exactly what it does, or even if it still exists. But I want to suggest that we do know where it is, and what will happen when it is blown, as it surely will be in the books. And yes, this will link back to Winterfell and the crypts by the end of the video, bear with me. Let's start with the legend of the Horn of Winter, which is thousands of years old, from the time of the Night's King. The Night's King, not the TV show Night King, George R. R. Martin has confirmed that they are very different, was the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, but fell in love with a woman from beyond the wall with bright blue eyes and ice-cold skin. The legend seems to suggest that she was an other, but never explicitly says so. The two ruled in a reign of terror from the Night Fort before an alliance between Brandon the Breaker, the King of Winter in Winterfell, and Joramun, a wildling king beyond the wall, brought it to an end. On discovering that the Night's King and his consort had been offering sacrifices to the others, all records of the Night's King were destroyed, and even his name was struck from history. We covered this briefly in the last video. What we didn't touch on there was how the Night's King was defeated, because the main myth, as told by Old Nan, doesn't really focus on that. However, we do know one other fact or legend about Joramun. He blew a horn known as the Horn of Winter, which later became known north of the wall as Joramun's Horn. Blowing it apparently woke the giants from the earth. The phrase Joramun blew the Horn of Winter and woke giants from the earth is actually repeated 5 different times in the story so far, so it's not just a passing detail. And it's a story that is clearly well known south of the wall, too. At one point, Jon makes a joke about the Horn of Winter and giants to Alliser Thorne, which would only work if he knew Alliser Thorne would also know the legend. So we don't know, but presumably these giants woken by the Horn of Winter helped to defeat the Night's King. Centuries and millennia later, by the time of the main story, the myth around Joramun and the Horn appears to have grown, north of the wall at least, through popular songs, it would seem. The free folk now seem to believe that blowing the horn would bring down the wall. This belief is so strong that Mance Rayder leads the wildling host he had assembled on a wild goose chase, digging up dozens of graves of legendary kings and heroes looking for it, delaying their journey south considerably. He wasn't thinking of actually using it, but instead trading it with the Night's Watch in return for safe passage through the wall. But he didn't find it. So he pretends to have found it, threatening the Night's Watch that he will get Tormund to blow it and bring down the wall. The threat was taken seriously enough by people like Melisandre that she had it burned afterwards. So what can we make from this legend? Well, we need to treat it with some caution, as we do every legend in the world of Ice and Fire, and we need to take account of one other aspect of the story. Because when Tormund is giving Jon a list of kings beyond the wall who have broken themselves on the wall or been broken by Winterfell's power, he includes Joramun on it. Joramun, who, we had thought, was in alliance with Winterfell, so perhaps an alliance with Brandon the Breaker of Winterfell was not long-lived, or perhaps Joramun tried to use the horn against the Night's King, and it didn't bring down the wall. Which obviously fits with the fact that there are no records anywhere of the wall being brought down or rebuilt, both of which would surely have been recorded somewhere, as they would have been massive events. So I think we can draw a tentative conclusion that the horn did not and does not bring down the wall, though it was used in the fight against the Night's King to, perhaps figuratively, wake giants from the earth. But then the horn just disappears from history, and we're left to wonder what happened to it. Mance Rayder spends months or years hunting for it with no success, but perhaps we can learn something from where he was looking. based presumably on parts of the legends we haven't heard, because he was very specific. He clearly thought it was north of the wall, and he clearly thought it was buried. He understandably focused on the graves of heroes and kings, but it seems not to have been in any of them. Of course, and you may well be ahead of me on this point, we do know of one ancient horn that was found buried north of the wall. While at the Fist of the First Men, an ancient defendable site, Ghost uncovers a bundle filled with dragonglass weapon heads and a mysterious old war horn. Jon tries blowing it, but he can't get it to work, and he decides that it must be broken. He gives it to Sam, who then lugs it all the way down to Old Town with him. Could this possibly be the Horn of Winter? Well, again, we don't know, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it might be. First, it is found north of the wall, just like Mance seems to think it would. Recently buried, it would appear, but seemingly left for the Night's Watch to find. Second, it is buried in a bundle of dragonglass weapons, which implies that it might be another weapon against the others, and also pretty much guarantees that the others won't find it, because they won't be digging through piles of dragonglass, given what dragonglass can do to them. And third, it is at the Fist of the First Men, which was an ancient redoubt from the Age of Heroes that men have used for years as a defendable site. And of course, we have the striking coincidence that the horn is broken. This is the word that Jon uses when he gives it to Sam, and it is an odd way to describe a horn, because a horn is not a complicated mechanical device. You simply blow down it in the right way and it works. It didn't look broken, just a bit chipped, and Jon clearly can't see anything wrong with it because he tries blowing it and it doesn't work. It looks like it should work, but it doesn't. It's broken. You might be picking up on a theme here. Joramun, who blew the Horn of Winter, was broken against the wall. His ally was Brandon the Breaker, and now we find a suspicious horn that is broken. Keep that linguistic link in mind, because there are also plot reasons to think that this horn is important. It was buried at the Fist of the First Men, seemingly as a gift for Jon and the Night's Watch, along with a cache of dragonglass weapons, which we later find out are very important in the fight against the others. So perhaps this is too. And Sam has gone out of his way to keep it with him, even when he gives up everything else. He takes it with him on a journey of thousands of miles to Old Town, and when he is in Braavos, he sells almost everything he has to get passage the rest of the way. The only things he doesn't sell are the clothes he is wearing and that horn. George R. R. Martin reminds us 3 times in the text that Sam has kept hold of the horn, referring to it as the broken horn. Why keep reminding us of it, unless it will become important? Okay, so we have a broken king beyond the wall, Joramun, a broken horn, and a stark king of winter known as the Breaker. It doesn't seem like too much of a leap in logic to suggest that Bran the Breaker colloquially broke Joramun, or actually broke the Horn of Winter, or both. But why might he break the Horn of Winter if it had proven so powerful against the Night's King? Clearly it is a powerful weapon or tool in some way, but if he were so concerned that it might fall into the wrong hands, why didn't he just destroy it? The most obvious answer to that is that he thought it might be needed again against the others someday, but he didn't want somebody accidentally sounding it in the meantime, so he broke it. Not physically, because it is still in one piece, but magically, perhaps, implying that perhaps it can be magically unbroken when it needs to be sounded again. Presumably when another threat equal to or greater than that of the first Night's King emerges. We're dealing with myths and legends here, so we can't say any of this with certainty, but it seems like the best working hypothesis that we have at the moment. And what does it do to justify needing being broken? The 2 things we're told are bringing down the wall, which is definitely not something you'd want to happen by accident. Imagine if when Jon had experimentally blown it, the wall had crumbled. It would be a very different story. But as we've already noted, bringing down the wall doesn't seem likely, both as no records or legends exist of it happening, and also, if this is a weapon to be used against the others, it seems a bit counterproductive to bring down your biggest defensive fortification. Unless that was the original idea, to allow Joramun and his wildling army to attack the Night's King hiding in the Night Fort, but we digress, because I want to focus on the other thing we're repeatedly told that it does: wake giants from the earth. Which brings me back, as promised, to the Winterfell crypts. And this is where perhaps first watching those previous videos in the series may be useful. But in summary, it seems clear that the spirits of Stark kings and lords have for millennia been trapped in those crypts, and in particular in those statues, which are repeatedly described as if they are still alive in some way, watching, judging, and waiting. We concluded in a previous video that those statues would probably rise and play a part in the second battle for the Dawn. The statues aren't just statues, they are an army to be used against the others. An army that needs waking from the earth. Again, I'm sure you're ahead of me here. What if the giants that can be awoken from the earth by the Horn of Winter are not the in-world race of giants, but the dead Stark kings in statue form? It's easy to see how the details could have got muddled over the millennia, and again George R. R. Martin tells us often that the myths in his world shouldn't be taken as literal truth, but often have truth hidden in them. There is actually a lot more in common between the first men and giants than you might think by just watching the TV show. The giants speak the old tongue of the first men, for example. There are many rumours of humans descended from giants, like the people of Skagos or even Hodor, and they bury their dead, often in barrows like the first men often do. This is important because there is even some confusion about whether one barrow, the Great Barrow, is the tomb of the first king of the first men, or a king of the giants. So it's possible that the legend might have got confused, or perhaps more likely, as this legend will have been passed down through the oral tradition rather than written, that waking giants from the earth doesn't mean the race of giants, but giants of history from the Age of Heroes. And this is, for me, quite a significant point. The statues in the crypts of Winterfell are giant in size. George R. R. Martin doesn't use that exact word, perhaps to keep that bit of the future plot hidden, but every time they are mentioned it's clear that they are big, very big. We don't read that they are raised up on plinths or anything, instead that they are sat between pillars with their backs to the sepulchres. And yet, just to take as an example, when Theon took Barbary Dustin there, we read that the Stone Kings stared down at him as he walked past, even though they were seated. Rickard Stark's statue looms above them, we're told, when they reach it, and Barbary Dustin reaches out a hand and touches Brandon Stark's statue's knee without seemingly bending down. Yes, these are giant statues. So, blowing the Horn of Winter when the Night's King threatened may or may not have brought the wall down, but it did seemingly wake giants from the earth, these statues. Which makes sense of Brandon the Breaker's moniker and story. After what must have felt like an era-defining struggle against the Night's King, the big question he must have faced would be what to do with the Horn of Winter. It will have proved so powerful that he wouldn't want to destroy it in case it was needed again, but he also wouldn't want anyone lightly raising his ancestors from the dead beneath his feet. Perhaps he decided to temporarily break it. Perhaps that is why the horn we believe to be the Horn of Winter is broken, and why Brandon was called the Breaker. It also makes sense of why it is called the Horn of Winter, because it wakes the kings of winter, and is intended to be used during the long winter. For those who enjoy the homages to some of his favourite other fantasy authors that George R. R. Martin often throws into his world, there is also a clear echo here of the dead men of Dunharrow in The Lord of the Rings, who follow Aragorn's lead into the battle with the armies of Mordor, although they are ghosts who might frighten the enemies, and these are real living statues that can do real damage, and presumably can't be raised again as ice wights as the others do to normal fallen foes. How might the horn be mended? That's a very good question. Perhaps Sam will discover something in an ancient tome in the Citadel, or perhaps, more likely I think, Bran will discover something going back in time looking through a weirwood tree. If that horn and the dragonglass were left for the Night's Watch by Bloodraven, as I suspect, he will want to make sure that they know how to make it work when the time is right, and he is now teaching Bran. And who will need to blow it? Well, this is quite a fun thought experiment, because there are really 4 possibilities. Joramun seems to have blown it last time, so perhaps the leader of the wildlings. Or as this is related to the Stark dead, it should be the current Lord of Winterfell and the King in the North. Or perhaps the prophesied prince that was promised, or Azor Ahai Reborn if you prefer. Or maybe if you're thinking continent-wide, maybe the rightful ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. I said I thought this was a fun thought exercise, because although you could come up with various names for each of these people, one person could actually technically meet all 4 criteria. Much is made of the fact that the wildling king beyond the wall is simply whoever the wildlings choose to follow, and at the moment, despite his rather inconvenient death and after Mance Rayder's faked death, that's probably Jon Snow. And though he hasn't been told yet, one of Robb Stark's last acts was to legitimise Jon and name him his heir as king and Lord of Winterfell. And Bloodraven certainly seems to think that Jon is the prince that was promised, and as probably Rhaegar's last remaining child, he's arguably the legitimate Targaryen heir to the Iron Throne too. Jon is by far the most likely person to blow that magic horn, and when it is blown, the Stark dead will rise. The first time there were probably only a few dead Starks in the crypts, but this time there will be a massive army. 8,000 years have passed. This will be an awe-inspiring and very scary army of the dead to fight the others' army of the dead. And finally, why are the Starks bound like this, condemned for countless generations to be changed to those crypts without rest, then unleashed to fight the others? That's what we'll be looking at in the next video. But what do you think? Do you think that Sam is carrying around the Horn of Winter? And do you agree about what it does? Let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to see more videos in this series exploring the role of the Starks, the Crypts, and the others, there's a link to that playlist appearing now on the left of your screen. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.